Melinda 她是北京这个 Newsweek 的负责人。Thank you. Close to the microphone so we can hear you good.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you so much, Bettye and James and Yahweh, for inviting me here. I'm very honored to be here. I think that the descendants of World War II veterans have a very special responsibility and also a very unique opportunity, and I'll tell you why I think that. First of all, some of you may wonder, why am I talking about descendants of World War II veterans? On the pamphlet, my description is from my day job, which is as a journalist. I'm the Newsweek magazine bureau chief in Beijing. I was born in Minneapolis. I'm a US citizen. My English is my first language. I learned Chinese later, but it's definitely English that's better. So for those of you, I apologize that I'm not speaking in Chinese for those of you who don't know English. Okay, so what do I know about being a descendant? Well, in addition to my professional description, I'm also the daughter of an honorary Doolittle Raider, my late father, Melinda Liu. So, how did this happen? Let me tell you a story about how this came about. This is a story about war and about peace, about strangers from different countries speaking different languages who helped each other survive and actually to succeed. Their common humanity is what bound them together despite all the cultural differences. It bound them together and it offers a precious lesson for the future. As we heard earlier from a number of excellent presentations, in April 1942, China had been engaged in war and conflict against Japan for a number of years, but actually America only officially entered the war with the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. In response, 80 American aviators trained in secret for a daring mission to stop Japan's series of victories in the Pacific. They were called the Doolittle Raiders, as you heard, after their leader, the legendary American aviator, Jimmy Doolittle. The US had an audacious plan. They were going to attack the Japan's home islands, something which had not happened for centuries. And they were going to do it as a surprise attack, trained in secret, implemented totally out of the blue. How could you do that? Their plan was to take the heavy, relatively heavy aircraft, a bomber, the B-25, and take off from an aircraft carrier, which this airplane had never been intended to do. And they trained basically the pilots in secret to take off from very short runways, as we heard earlier from our excellent Hornet historian. This was a risky mission, of course, but it was made even more risky by the fact that they had to take off earlier than expected. Well, what did that mean and what difference does it make? As we learned, it meant that they would run out of fuel before arriving at their destination, Chinese airfields in Zhejiang province. That meant that they would run out of fuel while they were still over the ocean. The raiders bombed their targets successfully, as we heard. It was a morale-boosting episode. entirely in secret. The aviators remember Japanese seeing the planes and waving at them because they thought they were Japanese planes over Japan. And ultimately, as we heard also, this act helped turn the tide of the war in the Pacific, even though in a strict physical and military sense, the losses on the ground were not great. However, it also meant that most of the Doolittle Raiders bailed out over China instead of landing at the airports that were supposed to be their destination. Most of them bailed out over Zhejiang and Jiangxi, but there were other provinces as well. They found themselves alone because, as you know, you bail out one by one. You usually don't bail out altogether. They're alone, they're hungry, they're lost, and of course they're being pursued by Japanese troops. They were discovered by Chinese strangers on the ground at the grassroots. These were farmers, fishermen, these were guerrillas. There were some military soldiers there. There were even bandits, Chinese bandits who were also patriotic, and they helped the Americans once they knew that they were Americans. That was one of the problems, though. Most of these residents had never seen foreigners before, certainly not white-skinned foreigners, and they didn't know where they had come from. Nonetheless, one by one, the Doolittle Raiders they found ways to communicate, they were sheltered, they were fed, and they were helped to escape from the Japanese. Of the 80 Doolittle Raiders, 8 were captured by the Japanese very quickly. However, 64 of them made it to safety, thanks to the kindness of Chinese strangers. And that's how I'm here talking to you about being a descendant of a World War II veteran. Even though he was not a military man, my father, by sheer serendipity, was one of those Chinese strangers. His was not the only story like this. There were astonishing examples of sacrifice and survival involving Westerners and Chinese during the war. My father happened to be in a coastal Zhejiang province city near Ningbo, a tiny little village actually. And he was then a graduate student of aeronautical engineering. He had been at Tsinghua University, which many of you will know, was forced to flee from then Beijing, what we call Beijing now, because the Japanese were there, and they relocated ultimately to Kunming and became what is known as Xinan Lianda University. So he had been in the West, Western China, had come back to the coastal area in order to marry my mother. And then he was now trying to get back to Kunming or Chongqing or somewhere in what was called Free China. And he was waiting to be smuggled over the Japanese lines by local people smugglers, we would call them now. And one night he was staying in a small hotel and someone knocked on his door and asked him a question that he thought was very strange. They said, "Do you speak English?" And he thought it was weird, but he answered truthfully and he said, "Yes, I do speak a little. I went to university and some of my course material was in English," because he was an aeronautical engineer and a lot of those books that he studied were in English. And they said, "Good, come with us and bring your suitcase." And he didn't know what was going to happen. He thought maybe, okay, now is the time. I'm going to be smuggled over the lines. I can get back to the western part of China that was not occupied by the Japanese. So they brought him to a room and pushed him into the room, and he looked around, and there he saw 5 Caucasian men, white men. They were disheveled. They were covered in mud and other stuff. They were hungry. They were suspicious. They were unshaven. And this happened to be crew number 2 of the Doolittle Raiders, who distinguished themselves actually by being one of the very, very few of those B-25s that actually managed to land successfully. They landed in a field, but then as they were abandoning their plane, they thought, well, we don't want the Japanese to get hold of anything of value in our plane, so they actually had to torch their own plane to destroy what was valuable there. So very quickly, my father stepped in, speaking English, was able to ascertain that these are Americans. So then the Chinese, who didn't quite know what to do with them at first, said, oh, they're Americans. Well, they're allies. And so my father immediately decided to become their translator, become their guide, and help not only them, those 5, but also all the others, because in the eyes of Chinese at that time, they were heroes. Okay, and now we get to the point of what does this have to do with our responsibility as descendants? Okay, so in 1946, my father actually migrated to the United States, and he reunited with the Doolittle Raiders, and they named him an honorary Doolittle Raider, and he went to almost every annual reunion that they had. And the one thing that taught me, because as his daughter, he brought me to those reunions as well. The legacy of what these men did, the lessons of what they went through, must be transmitted to the younger generation. And I very unfortunately did not talk to my father or interview him. You know, I'm a journalist. This is a paradox. I never interviewed him as I should have about the war. Only after he died in 2009 did I say, oh gosh, that's a real story and I should have learned more. But I've been trying to make up for that lost time. In the past 15 years, I've helped many descendants of Doolittle Raiders come back to China to follow in the footsteps of their fathers and even grandfathers, and to see where this amazing episode in their lives took place. I have worked with the then president of the Children of the Doolittle Raiders. We suggested to the city of Chuzhou, the municipal authorities of Chuzhou, about a decade ago, saying, wouldn't it be great to have a museum to the Doolittle Raid here, because so many of them passed through here. And in 2018, I'm very proud to say that I returned with about 24 descendants of Doolittle Raiders to cut the ribbon for the Doolittle Raid Memorial Hall there. Last year, it was expanded to double its size, and since April 2024, close to 200,000 visitors have been there, and it's been a great success. And thank you. And in closing, I should also say that I've been very busy also with an awards program at the No. 2 school in Chuzhou, where I'm trying to encourage students to improve their English language communication skills. So we have a yearly award to students. In the beginning, we were asking them to write essays. And this year, we're about to award them for short videos of 3 minutes long where they talk in English about the Doolittle Raid. In my mind, this sort of transmission from the older generation to the younger generation is one of the most important things that we can do. And I hope this lesson will be seen as a precious lesson for years to come, and that it will stay in our memories for a long, long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melinda.